Aloha and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Got Your Six podcast. This six-question podcast brings together high performers to share their methods, strategies, and ideas, delivered in an informative and, most importantly, actionable way that'll help you lead yourself and those around you from the battlefield to the boardroom. Coming to you every episode, I'm your host, Tony Nash. And into the breach.
Nothing mentioned on this podcast is an endorsement or opinion of the Department of Defense.
I got your six, we got your back. Got your six, we got your back. Got your six, we got your back. I got your six.
Sixers, what an amazing treat we have today. Keith Dow is with us, the co-founder, author of Dead Reckoning Collective, a publishing company which is near and dear to my heart. I've absolutely loved all the books, and I can't keep them all because they come out so quickly. I know Amy just dropped one called Poppies back in December. I'm looking forward to grabbing that here in the next week or so. Keith, welcome to the Got Your Six podcast.
Hey, thank you so much, Tony. How are you, man?
I'm doing well. So you got out in early 2013, right, as a military police officer? Correct?
Yeah, I got out in 2013, and I had a wild transition. I made lots of things harder on myself, jumped into school, did all kinds of things.
So what do you think you've made the hardest on yourself in that transition?
Oh man, I so for like a decade I moved to Canada, and with that came immigration stuff and just making like all kinds of things harder, whether it be accessing VA services and benefits or anything like that. Like anything that I asked anyone up there about, an American living in Canada was like a first for them, as well as like anybody that I had to ask at like the VA or anybody like in any kind of agency in the United States, like what I should do as like an American living there. Like everybody's like, oh, I don't know. No one's ever asked me that. So like everything that most people experience getting out, emotionally and socially and stuff, and then amplified by like 1,000 because my general day-to-day living situation was also like that. It was,
Yeah. And so in that like ambiguity, right, you look for things that remain constant, right? What do you implement from your time in the military through that transition, now that it has almost been a decade, which is time is flying, that you constantly implement every day?
I think servitude, service to community is a big one for me. That's something that, despite a couple different like hiccups and changes in career path and stuff like that, is something that has stayed pretty constant, whether it's helping people get their written words on paper and into published books, or actually helping people in like at a clinical level with what I'm doing right now with a Master of Social Work. All of it is pretty consistent with service, which was I really didn't actually enjoy being an MP that much. Go figure. But what I did enjoy was, building relationships with people that MPs don't usually build relationships with. And, because like there's that whole real recognize real thing. And being someone who is recognized as a guiding force and somebody who will help you. I've always enjoyed that. So that's definitely been a constant from military to now.
How do you approach servitude at two different points, right? Allowing someone to be vulnerable enough to write down what they're thinking, and especially, what you guys do at DRCs, not always poetry heavy, but that is just a very unique form of literature because you have to be able to take very complex ideas, simplify them, but also make them complex at the same time. On top of, your social work that you're doing through the University of New England in your master's program.
I think they're different levels. I think, I think you're right. I think there's two different entry points there. And I would argue that sometimes poetry is a way to kind of hold off vulnerability. Sometimes I find that I can be less vulnerable. I can still express myself without fully exposing everything. Whereas, if I was writing an essay, I would have to say I'd have to spell everything out. With poetry, you can kind of camouflage words sometimes. You can you can write about an experience without really writing about it. And some would argue, and or some people don't prefer poetry that way. But that's one of the things that I enjoy about it. It's not always the way that I write. I mean, as far as the way that my master's program enables me to do that, that's how I started working with 107, is through my field placement for my MSW.
You want to talk about 107 real quick and the amazing work that they're doing?
Yeah, so 107, if, anybody's listening that hasn't heard, it's a veteran nonprofit. We do a lot of advocacy and research in the realm of toxic exposure. So usually when people hear toxic exposure, the first thing they think is burn pits, which is one piece of the pie. The rest is, any exposure from just extended ammunition expenditures to jet fuel and rotor wash. All the nasty places that we've had to stay, like if you've heard about like the Fort Bragg barracks or the Camp Lejeune, family housing, even water supplies and stuff like that. So, toxic exposure that causes illness in service members and families. That's kind of the stuff that we're dealing with. So doing a lot of research in terms of what causes those things, as well as like advocacy work and help with the immediate needs program, which is where I come in. So, but I mean, in terms of that, like asking for help is difficult, even if you deserve it. Sometimes people, especially in our line of work, have difficulty just making that step and asking someone for help. There's this stigma against like feeling like you're putting your hand out, and it's not always that way, but it can definitely feel like it at times.
And that's the piece about servitude that is hard for some people to kind of stomach, or at least initially lean into, is you serve others, but you have to allow yourself to be served by others, which is that is a complete mindset shift that has to occur at some point.
Yeah. And I think that's where veteran organizations, or at least like veteran-centric organizations that are trying to serve that population, I have seen them staffed with civilians who have no military experience, don't have a military family, who are really competent and, great members of the team. But I think it is important to have people who understand that population staffing those positions, because you need to be able to bust through that thick skin sometimes, and approach them in a different way. I've had people explain it different ways to me, and being able to explain to someone like, well, it's not for you, it's for your family. Well, it's not because you need a check every month. It's because you need care. Those kinds of things are important to be able to convey to somebody.
And being able to address that deeper purpose, were you able to find that like in a book? Because all the work that you're doing, like I said, at DRC, Hunter 7, what influenced you to kind of get into that line, that whole like advocacy piece, looking to help others?
Oh man, that's a great question. I don't know, a lot. I mean, I just turned 35 this year, so I'll chalk it up to 35 years of a whole bunch of different experiences. Your best teachers are sometimes your worst teachers, and vice versa. So family, friends, relatives, and educators and coworkers, everybody kind of chips off a piece for you, whether you like it or not, and whether they want to or not. And I think that's really it. But I don't think any one book or any one year of my life has contributed more than any other, to be honest.
It's that constant sculpting of experience as you go on.
I think
on these
so.
past 35 years. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you determine who you want to be, but I also I'm a pretty firm believer in social learning theory, and you are for sure a product of your environment in one way or another. You are shaped by your experiences and the people that are a part of those experiences, whether you like it or not. It just may go one way or the other, but either way, you're influenced.
Yeah, and being shaped by your experience, right, allows you to kind of take in everything kind of going on around you and working on that self-awareness. What is something that you're currently working on where you haven't really dove into that realm ever, that you're, a novice at, let's say at this point?
Well, that's the social work piece. And even though I'm in a graduate program, I'm in a graduate program because it was more feasible for me to obtain a graduate degree than to start from scratch because I already had a bachelor's. But really I am, whether I just wanting to help people isn't enough. And I am constantly, being tested in that program. I'm definitely like, there's a lot of stuff where I'm like, my brain doesn't work like this. The research piece is difficult for me still. I'm really lucky to be able to like learn from great people like Chelsea and Jack at Hunter 7, who are, the head of the research side over there. But I mean, learning about all those things, I never thought when I was younger, I never thought I was destined for academia. I was, for sure. Like, I had a couple friends in high school who like all of a sudden were like, oh, I got accepted here. And I hadn't even thought about applying to school. I didn't know, I didn't have anybody like pushing me any one way or the other, in terms of like significant life decisions like that. So, it didn't occur to me that I would be, anywhere close to here at any point. So this is definitely like one of the things, the retraining,
Yeah, and now you're the tip of the spear, kind of going into it. Do you feel like it's that belief in servitude that really has improved your life and allowed you to get to where you are today, or is there another, belief or behavior or habit that has really kind of improved your life? Let's say in the last 5 years.
Yeah, I think when I first got out of the military, I thought I would want to do something really simple, and it became really clear really fast that like the manual jobs and stuff, which I still enjoy those things. I still enjoy building things. I still enjoy hard work. But it was I needed something more. And maybe I could have found that balance if I had like done one of the jobs that I was doing and also volunteering or something like that. But I think doing it, serving as a career, is something that I was drawn to, and drawn, in a way drawn back to. But I definitely didn't think it was going to lead to like the clinical side. I thought I was going to be, muscle well into my 40s. But body starts catching up with you, and then you start thinking a little bit more, and then working a job in a hospital, I kind of got exposed to like the clinical side of social work, and I was like, oh shit, yeah, maybe I'll kind of start looking into that. And so, those little exposures. So, maybe going back to your other question, maybe it was that job that kind of pushed me in this direction, and probably had like more of an influence on my trajectory than others.
So being that security guard at the hospital, allowing you to kind of microdose different elements of the clinical work, you would say?
Yeah, I think, it was my first, we worked really closely. It was a large hospital, and we worked really closely with clientele. It definitely wasn't like checking doors and giving parking tickets. Like we were inside and we were getting in fights every day. And worked really closely like with the mental health inpatient unit and the emergency department and stuff. And that was like right after I finished my undergrad. I started working that job, and really like it was eye-opening in the fact that I had never worked in any kind of environment like that, like as far as like a clinical environment, a medical environment, anything even close to that. So I had never really considered any of those career paths, because like even by the time I had thought like, oh, maybe that'd be cool, I was like, it's way too late to go back to school, which is a farce. But I just, I didn't think it was in the cards. So so seeing that, and then realizing that was an option, I started kind of piecing together how I could accomplish that goal.
I want to touch on something real quick. You just mentioned that self-doubt, where you said it's not really in the cards for me, and you almost like self-selected yourself out of what you're doing now.
Yeah.
What was that driving force, or what kind of kept you coming back to like, no, there is something here. I'm going to kind of keep diving deeper into this.
For sure, being into my 30s and not wanting to fight for a living for the rest of my life. That was a pretty common theme up to that point, and so that was like a good little nudge. There were other factors for sure, but that was a nudge. I was like, yeah, all right, this is maybe not gonna work long term. And so I started looking into that, and I'm like, oh, this actually sounds really cool. And there's like a whole bunch of different things I could do with this, because I ended up going the MSW route because initially I looked into, because it was a shorter career, like, pipeline.
Short timeline.
Yeah. I looked into a Master of Counseling Psychology, and the problem with that was like it varied country to country, state to state. At the time I was not planning on being in Canada forever, so I was like going from all these things. I was like, licensing and stuff like that. It became like really clear that was not going to be a consistent thing. Whereas like an MSW pretty much rings out. All you're going to have to do is maybe jump through a couple licensing hoops.
Right.
But I mean, an MSW you can also use without a license. There's other things that you can do just with that knowledge, which is kind of the way that I'm going with like research and program development and stuff like that. I've even done some like policy and legislation stuff with 107. So it's just a really, really diverse like degree path in career field. So you can do a lot with it.
Yeah, it is very, from what you're saying too, very like flexible when you're doing that Masters of Social Work. Now, along the way, right, as you continue to kind of nudge into different areas, there's failure that has to occur inevitably.
Oh, for
what
sure.
would you say is your greatest failure that has ultimately led to your success?
I think I've for sure learned a bit better how to manage time. And I'm better at recognizing when I'm stacking too much and when I'm dangerously close to like, spinning out of control from like over commitment. And I think a lot of people struggle with that. A lot of people don't even know how to recognize it in themselves. So that is always on my radar. The overcommitting side of things. Because I think it really has been, at times my greatest failure is when.
Can you give it a recent? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, a recent example. Not specifically, but really like you're not serving anyone if you overstack your plate. You're not serving anyone, because then you just suck at everything. That has for sure been a case for me. You can't be a good parent. You can't be a good partner. You can't be a good writer. You can't be a good social worker. Like nothing, like everything. You're just going to be half-ass at everything. And so, if you learn to prioritize those things, then it works out in the long run. It helps, anybody that suffers from like social anxiety, like that overcommitment is huge. And it's a habit for sure, but you can retrain.
And because you want to do so much, you are constantly aware of what you're doing at that moment, knowing you and how you operate. How have you been able to stay focused and in the moment of, working on your MSW versus, being a father versus writing and working, with DRC?
Oh shit. I'm still winging it, bro. It's still, I'm by no means an example. I think one indicator for me is, some people look at their planners and they see a whole bunch of shit written in it, and they're like, oh, that's a busy week. For me, a really busy week in my planner is very few things written, because it means that it doesn't, like, my workload never really decreases. It's pretty consistent. So if a week is like pretty blank in terms of the page, it means that I fucked off on my planner because it was that busy. So,
wow.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. I was just looking at it. I also I color code like by organization and like task and stuff like that with highlighters. Just so I can kind of measure like how much time is going into what. And, so when I don't do that, like it kind of starts with that and it drops. And so if I can see like based on my level of engagement with like planning and stuff like that, where I've gone awry, which is great. Like then it's, it's a good indicator. Like, hey, get back on target.
Yeah, no, that's a great like kind of safety check.
Yep.
And so Keith, thank you so much for your time today. Before we kind of wrap up, I have to ask Keith Dow, how are you better today than yesterday?
Oh shit, man. I went into knowing I wanted to just buckle down, after the morning and get into the workday from the comfort of home. I went into a friend's office space, thinking about the fact that it was. I went into an office space that my friend and my partner occupy, knowing that like surrounding yourself with creative people is sometimes really good for you. And I was like, have you done that in a little while? No, you haven't. So that was what I did. And I think I'm better for it. And I made it back just in time, for this podcast. I ate, I fed the dogs, talked to the man, Tony Nash.
The Sixers appreciate it. I appreciate it. Keith, where can people go to connect with you? And all the different amazing organizations you're a part of.
So most of what I do with Dead Reckoning can be found on the Dead Reckoning Collective Instagram page. DeadReckoningCO.com is the website. Those are both where we're most active. For anything that's not posted on Instagram, we do have a newsletter, so sign up for that on the website. And then 107.org. You can see some of my stuff there. If you need, help with any kind of stuff we mentioned in that. That's pretty much it, man.
Awesome. And Sixers, we'll make sure we link all of those links in the show notes, wherever you are getting your podcast. Keith, thank you so much for sharing your time, your methods, your strategies, and your actionable advice here on the Got Your Six podcast. And of course, thanks for having our six.
No doubt. Thanks, man.
I don't know what you've been told, Sixers, but the lawyers would like us to remind you that the views, opinions, and comments expressed on the Got Your Six podcast are solely those of the hosts or guests, to include current and previous Department of Defense employees, and should in no way be considered the opinions of or endorsements on behalf of the Department of Defense or any of its components, divisions, contractors, or other current and previous staff members.